Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the, frankly, crucial and always shifting world of FAA drone regulation. We're focusing specifically on Part 107, but also the big one, the mandated ID rules in Part 89, and kind of the roadmap for more advanced flying. Our mission here is to take all this dense info, the rules, the waivers, the tech specs, and make it into a clear map, really, for you, the well-informed learner, so you can navigate these digital skies with real confidence.
And that map, it's more critical now than maybe ever before. We're really standing at a key point, an inflection point, I'd say, in unmanned aviation. For the last decade or so, flying a drone professionally often meant applying for specific permissions, case-by-case exceptions. That was the waiver era. But now we are fully shifting. We're moving into an era that's governed by actual codified performance-based rules and, crucially, mandatory identification.
Right, not just paperwork chasing anymore.
Exactly. This isn't just about bureaucracy. This is the mechanism, the foundation that allows the FAA to, confidently integrate millions, literally millions of unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, into the National Airspace System, the NAS. So we're going to unpack exactly what this shift means for pilots today, especially the full enforcement of remote ID, which is huge, and also how routine things like flying over people or flying at night, are now handled by rule, not primarily by exception.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that. We should probably start with the requirement that really forms the bedrock here, right? The one affecting almost every single pilot in the U.S., commercial or just flying for fun, the digital license plate.
That's the perfect place to start. We're talking about remote ID, or RID. It's governed by Part 89 of the Federal Aviation Regulations. It is mandatory now, and that FAA analogy, the digital license plate, it's spot on. It gives that necessary identification, that real-time situational awareness, and that's just absolutely crucial for, boosting safety, providing security, and frankly, finally enabling those future complex operations we all talk about.
Like package delivery, long-range inspection, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Package delivery, infrastructure inspection, maybe even air taxis down the line. RID is foundational for all of that.
Okay, so let's drill down on the mandatory part. Who exactly needs this digital license plate? Is it the same weight threshold for everyone?
It applies pretty broadly, but the specific threshold does depend on how you're operating. The basic rule says any model aircraft or drone weighing over 0.55 pounds, that's 249 grams, has to comply. Doesn't matter if it's ready to fly a traditional RC plane, a fixed wing, or even a fast FPV drone you built yourself. Over 249 grams, you need RID.
Okay, but you mentioned a distinction for commercial pilots.
Yes, and this is critical for our professional audience. If you are flying under Part 107, meaning for any commercial purpose, any non-recreational flight, you are required to use remote ID regardless of the weight, even if your aircraft is under that 0.55 pound limit.
Wow. Okay, so that hits those super popular sub 250 gram drones, right? Like the DJI minis. If I use one of those for, say, a quick real estate shoot or checking construction progress or maybe mapping a small field.
Any of those. If it benefits a business, if it's not strictly for fun, then Part 107 applies, and with it, the RID requirement kicks in, even for those tiny drones. Compliance is not optional based on weight if you're flying commercially.
So the flight has to be purely 100% recreational to get that weight exception.
That's the bottom line. The second it generates value, becomes part of a business, anything like that, you're under Part 107 rules, and RID is mandatory.
Okay, the timeline for this.
Yeah.
It felt a bit bumpy. There were delays, this discretion period. Can we just get crystal clear on the history and where we stand right now with enforcement? What dates really matter?
Yeah, it was a bit of a journey. The final rule itself was published way back in January 2021. The first key deadline was for the manufacturers. They had to make sure all new aircraft produced after September 2022 had the RID broadcast capability built in. Then operators, people with older drones, they were initially given 30 months to comply. That pointed to a deadline around mid-2023. specifically September 2023.
But September 2023 came and went, and it wasn't like a hard switch was flipped, right? There was definitely confusion.
You're right. That's when the FAA announced a period of enforcement discretion. It was basically a grace period. They recognized, that the supply chain for the add-on broadcast modules was, slow. Pilots needed more time to get older aircraft equipped or maybe buy new compliant ones, so they decided not to bring the hammer down immediately to avoid grounding, frankly, a huge chunk of the existing drone fleet.
Sensible. So when did that grace period officially end? When did the enforcement actually start?
The date everyone needs to have circled, highlighted, tattooed maybe, is March 16, 2024. That's the day the FAA formally ended the discretion period. Full compliance enforcement began then, and the stakes now are absolutely real. Non-compliance after March 16th can, and likely will, trigger FAA action. We're talking potentially hefty fines or even action against your Part 107 remote pilot certificate.
So no more excuses. Compliance isn't a nice-to-have or something for the future. It's a must-do on today's pre-flight checklist.
Absolutely non-negotiable. It's part of flying legally today.
Okay, so we know why and when. Let's talk about how. How does a pilot actually comply? The sources mentioned 3 distinct ways, sort of tailored to different situations.
Correct. The FAA set up 3 pathways to provide flexibility, given the huge variety of drones out there.
The first one seems the most straightforward. Just buy a drone that already has it built in. Standard remote ID UA.
That's the ideal, the modern solution. These are aircraft, mostly the higher-end consumer and professional drones you'd buy today, maybe in the last couple of years. They have the RID broadcast capability integrated right into the main system, the flight controller, by the manufacturer. And importantly, the rules require that if there's a problem with the built-in RID system, it has to notify the pilot. In many cases, it's designed to actually prevent the drone from even taking off if RID isn't functioning. Built-in compliance check.
Okay, path number 2. This is for the older drones, the legacy fleet, and maybe the DIY folks, the broadcast module.
Exactly. The broadcast module is the retrofit option. It's a small physical device you attach securely to your older drone or one you built yourself. And it's not just a simple radio transmitter. It's basically a mini standalone system. It has to have its own sensors onboard GPS to know its location, an IMU, an inertial measurement unit to detect takeoff, and usually a barometer or compass for accurate altitude and heading. And critically, you have to register this module with the FAA using its unique serial number. That links the module's broadcast back to you.
What are we talking about in terms of cost and, physical size or weight for these modules?
The manufacturers have actually done a pretty good job keeping costs down. Generally, you're looking in the range of maybe $20, maybe a bit more for some models. And they're designed to be light, usually adding somewhere between 10 and maybe 100 grams. That's important, obviously, for not messing up the drone's flight performance, especially smaller ones. Because they're standalone, they don't need deep integration with the drone's original flight controller, which makes adding them much simpler.
Got it. And the third option, this seems like a specific carve-out for certain locations, the FRIA.
FRIA stands for FAA Recognized Identification Area. Think of it like a designated safe zone, geographically defined. Usually it's a model aircraft club field. Within the boundaries of an approved FRIA, you can legally fly a non-RID equipped drone that weighs over the 0.55-pound limit, but only under visual line of sight rules. But it's important who can apply. The FAA limits FRIA applications to community-based organizations, CBOs, like the Academy of Model Aeronautics, AMA-affiliated clubs, and educational institutions, like universities or schools with drone programs. If you fly in a FRIA, the pilot and the drone have to stay strictly inside those boundaries. It's basically a regulatory container for older, non-compliant aircraft used in specific controlled environments.
Okay, that makes sense. 3 clear paths. Now let's get into the tech weeds a bit. What exactly is being broadcast and how? We keep hearing it's not using cell networks.
Yeah, that's a really crucial clarification. The sources are very clear on this. Remote ID is a local broadcast system. It is not a network system that relies on cell towers or the internet. It's designed to transmit wirelessly using an open, standardized protocol. Usually that means Wi-Fi beacon technology or Bluetooth, operating in the common 2.4 or 5 gigahertz bands. It follows a specific industry standard, ASTM F3411.
So the signal just goes out locally, like a beacon, not routed anywhere.
Precisely. No SIM card needed, no network registration, and importantly, no monthly data fees associated with the broadcast itself. It's just sending out a short-range signal, maybe think like a car's key fob transponder, or just a local Wi-Fi signal you might pick up walking by a cafe. Anyone nearby with a standard smartphone or tablet running an appropriate app can receive that signal. And this local broadcast is key because it lets, say, law enforcement or security personnel on the ground immediately detect and get basic info about a drone operating nearby. And the data has to be broadcast frequently, at least once every second, so it's providing almost real-time updates.
Okay, real-time updates. What specific bits of information are in that broadcast message?
It's a fairly robust set of data points. The message includes the unique ID, either the drone's serial number if it's standard RAD, or the module serial number. The drone's precise current GPS location, its speed, its heading, its altitude above ground level, a time mark for synchronization, and also an emergency status flag, though that's less commonly used right now. And then there's that fascinating technical distinction you mentioned, depending on which compliance path you're using.
Right. If you've got a newer drone with standard remote ID built in, what location gets broadcast?
In that case, the system broadcasts the location of the control station. That means it's broadcasting the real-time, potentially moving location of the pilot holding the controller. The system knows where both the drone and the controller are.
Okay. And if you're using the add-on broadcast module?
With a module, it only transmits the location of the takeoff point. It records the GPS coordinates where the drone first initialized and took off. It doesn't track the pilot if they move away from that spot during the flight.
That seems like a deliberate privacy consideration, maybe for the hobbyist community using older gear.
I think that's exactly the intent. It provides the necessary location data for safety and accountability without broadcasting the potentially moving location of, say, a model aircraft flyer walking around a field.
So given that location data is being broadcast publicly, how does the FAA handle privacy for the registered owner? You mentioned the license plate analogy.
Right, and this is where it holds up really well. The information that's broadcast publicly, the serial number, the drone's location, the pilot's or takeoff location, is not personally identifiable information, or PII. It does not include your name, your address, your phone number. Think of it like seeing a license plate on a car. You see the plate number, but you don't instantly know who owns it.
So the link between that broadcast serial number and the actual owner, that's kept separate.
Exactly. That highly sensitive data, the registration database linking the serial number to the owner's contact information, is held securely by the FAA. It is not part of the public broadcast.
Who gets access to that sensitive data then? How does the traceback work if there's an incident?
Access is tightly controlled. That registration data can only be shared by the FAA with federal security partners like the FBI or DHS, or, importantly for local incidents, with law enforcement personnel. Specifically, officers who are part of the Law Enforcement Assistance Program, known as LEAP agents, and even then it's typically only shared upon an official complaint or request as part of an investigation.
Can you clarify what a LEAP agent is? Is that just any police officer?
Not quite. A LEAP agent is usually a state or local police officer, sheriff's deputy, maybe state patrol, who has received specific training from the FAA, often in partnership with the FBI, on aviation regulations and drone incident response. They act as the FAA's sort of deputized local enforcement arm for drone issues. So if, say, a resident calls 911 about a drone flying dangerously low over their house near an airport, the responding agent could use a standard smartphone app to capture that drone's broadcast serial number. They then submit that number securely to the FAA. The FAA performs the lookup in the secure database and provides the registered owner's contact info back to the EP agent for follow-up.
So it's a targeted, complaint-driven process for enforcement, not just random surveillance.
Correct. It's designed for safety and security investigations, not for general public tracking of drone owners.
Beyond just enforcement, how does this public broadcast aspect help enable those future complex operations you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, this is key for integration. The fact that the basic flight data, location, altitude, ID, is broadcast openly allows for the development of future airspace management systems, often called U-Space or Unmanned Traffic Management, UTM. Third-party companies, the unmanned service suppliers or USS providers, can build systems that passively listen for these RAD broadcasts. They can use that data to provide local situational awareness. Imagine seeing other nearby drones on a map, even if they aren't connected to the internet. They can offer services like conformance monitoring, making sure drones stay in their assigned corridors, or provide geo-awareness advisories like, hey, you're approaching restricted airspace. It builds the foundation for automated strategic deconfliction without requiring every drone to be constantly connected to a central network.
That's a really thorough explanation of RAD. Before we move on, any quick operational or registration details we should cover? What about recreational flyers who own multiple drones?
Good point. Recreational flyers, those operating under Section 44809, have a slight advantage in registration. They only need to register once with the FAA and can apply that single registration number to all the drones they own. However, and this is important, their online registration profile must list the specific manufacturer serial number for every single RID-compliant aircraft or RID broadcast module they intend to fly. So one registration number, but a full inventory of serial numbers linked to it.
And that's different for commercial pilots.
Yes. Generally, Part 107 commercial operators are required to register each aircraft individually, each getting its own unique FAA registration number. Though there are some nuances depending on how they structure their fleet management.
What about the FTV racing community or people building drones from kits or scratch?
They don't get a pass just because they built it. If the final aircraft weighs over 0.55 pounds, home builders must either equip it with a compliant broadcast module or commit to flying it only within the boundaries of an FAA-recognized identification area, FRIA. When they install and register that module, they are essentially acting as the manufacturer in the eyes of the regulation, taking responsibility for ensuring that specific aircraft is traceable via its RID broadcast.
Okay, that covers RID pretty comprehensively. It's mandatory, enforcement is active since March 2024, and compliance is achievable through these three pathways. This really feels like the key that unlocks the next stage, doesn't it? Operations over people and night flight.
Absolutely. Now that we have this foundational layer of identification established, the FAA was able to move forward with performance-based rules for operations that previously required cumbersome waivers. This shift is arguably the biggest regulatory unlock the professional drone industry has seen in years.
Yeah, for years, flying at night or over people felt like climbing a mountain of paperwork. You needed specific, often hard-to-get waivers. Now the message seems to be, it's mostly by rule. Let's start with night ops. How has that changed?
It's a night and day difference, pun intended. Back in 2021, the FAA rolled out updated rules under Part 107 that effectively normalize night operations. If you, the pilot, and your aircraft meet the requirements, you no longer need a specific waiver just to fly after civil twilight.
So what happened to all those pilots who did go through the effort and got night waivers before 2021? Are those still valid?
Nope, they are completely obsolete.
Yeah.
The FAA officially terminated all those legacy Part 107 night waivers back on May 17th, 2021. If you want to fly at night today, even if you held one of those old waivers, you have to comply with the current rules regarding pilot training and aircraft equipment. The old waivers are meaningless now.
Okay, so what are the current requirements to fly legally at night under Part 107?
It breaks down into two main things: the pilot and the drone. First, the remote pilot in command, or RPIC, must have completed updated training. This means either passing the updated initial aeronautical knowledge test or completing the free online recurrent training module, both of which now include specific curriculum covering night operations, physiology, and risks. Second, the aircraft itself must be equipped with anti-collision lighting that meets specific performance standards.
What are those standards for the light? How bright does it need to be?
The requirement is that the anti-collision light must be visible for at least 3 nautical miles. That's quite a distance. And it also needs to have a flash rate sufficient to avoid collisions, typically a bright, rapidly strobing white or red light.
And the purpose of this light? It's not really for the drone pilot on the ground to see their own drone better, is it?
That's a really crucial point. While the pilot still absolutely must maintain visual line of sight, VLOS, with the drone itself, the primary purpose of that bright, flashing anti-collision light is for manned aircraft pilots to see the drone, especially in low light or dark conditions. It acts as a conspicuity device, a warning beacon, to help prevent mid-air collisions in the shared airspace.
Okay, night ops covered. Update your training, get the right lights. Now, the really big one, operations over people, or OOP. This used to be incredibly difficult to get approval for. How does Subpart D change the game?
Subpart D of Part 107 is the blueprint. It essentially created 4 distinct categories of drones based mostly on weight and impact energy that are allowed to conduct routine operations over people without needing a specific waiver under Section 107.39. It fundamentally shifts the burden. Instead of you proving safety through a custom waiver application, you now demonstrate compliance by using an aircraft that meets the specific design and performance requirements defined in one of these 4 categories.
Let's break down those categories. Category 1 seems like the simplest entry point aimed at the smallest drones.
Exactly. Category 1 is the micro drone pathway. To qualify, the UAS must weigh 0.55 pounds. that's 250 grams or less, including everything attached to it, like propeller guards or maybe a payload. And critically, it must not have any exposed rotating parts, think propellers, that could lacerate human skin on impact. If your drone meets that weight limit and has no exposed sharp spinning bits, you can operate it over people. The responsibility here falls entirely on the remote PIC to verify the aircraft meets these simple criteria before flying over people. No special manufacturer declaration is needed for Cat 1 itself.
But there's a small catch with RAD for Cat 1, right? Even under 250 grams.
Yes, important reminder. If you are flying that Category 1 drone specifically over an open-air assembly of human beings, think concerts, festivals, sporting events, then remote ID is required, even though the drone is under the normal RAD weight threshold. Flying over crowds triggers the RAD requirement for Cat 1.
Okay, once we go above that 250 gram mark, things get more complex with Categories 2 and 3. They introduce this concept based on performance, specifically kinetic energy limits.
Right. This is where the FAA got really innovative, moving beyond just weight. For Category 2, the focus shifts to potential impact force. The rule states the UAS must be designed, produced, or modified in such a way that it will not cause an injury to a person equivalent to or greater than the impact from 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy from a rigid object.
11 foot-pounds. Can you give us a sense of what that feels like? What's an equivalent impact?
It's hard to give a perfect analogy, but think maybe the force of a standard baseball dropped from about 10 feet, or perhaps dropping a 16-pound bowling ball onto a hard surface from about, say, hip height. The FAA's research determined this 11 foot-pound threshold represents an acceptable level of risk, minimizing the chance of serious injury like skull fracture or major trauma if the drone were to impact someone's head or torso. And just like Category 1, a Category 2 drone must also not have any exposed rotating parts that could cause lacerations.
Okay, so Cat 2 allows heavier drones, but caps the impact energy. Now, Category 3 raises that energy cap, but adds operating restrictions.
Precisely. That's the trade-off. Category 3 allows a higher potential impact energy, up to 25 foot-pounds, around 33.9 joules. Because the potential for injury is greater, the environments where you can operate are much more constrained. To fly a Cat 3 drone over people, you must either be operating over a closed or restricted access site, meaning everyone present is on private property, they've been notified about the drone operation overhead, and they can't just casually leave the area, think a movie set or a construction site with controlled access. Or if you are flying over people who are not participants and are in an open area, like a public street, the flight over them must be transit only.
Transit only. What exactly does that mean in practice? What can't you do?
It means you can't hover over them, you can't circle over them, you can't fly back and forth repeatedly over them while doing a task. You can basically fly in a straight line over non-participating people to get from point A to point B, but you can't loiter or maintain sustained flight directly above them.
Got it. Pass through, but don't hang around. And finally, Category 4. This sounds like the most rigorous.
Category 4 is for the heavy lifters, the most robust operations. This category is reserved for drones that have gone through a formal FAA airworthiness certification process, much like manned aircraft. Think Part 21 certification. Because they've met these much higher safety standards, Category 4 certified aircraft are permitted to fly over any people under basically any conditions allowed by their certification. But achieving this certification is a complex and expensive process, demanding rigorous design validation, production quality control, and ongoing documented maintenance and inspections. So Cat 4 is typically reserved for very high-end industrial applications or perhaps future air taxi type vehicles.
So for Categories 2 and 3, the key is proving you meet those kinetic energy thresholds. This relies heavily on this performance-based idea using something called a means of compliance, MOC, and a declaration of compliance, DOC. How does a manufacturer show that maybe a heavier drone is still safe enough?
This is where the engineering comes in, and it's quite clever. The basic kinetic energy Formula 12 mass velocity 2 assumes the drone hits like a solid brick, transferring all its energy instantly. That's often not realistic.
Because drones can be designed to break apart or absorb impact.
Exactly. The FAA's performance-based approach allows manufacturers to account for things like frangibility, how easily parts break off, or designing specific crumple zones, much like modern cars have. If a manufacturer can demonstrate, using an FAA-accepted testing method, the MOC, that the drone's design may be cushioned landing gear, propeller shrouds, or an airframe that absorbs energy significantly reduces the amount of energy actually transferred to a person during an impact, then a drone that's heavier or flies faster might still meet the 11 or 25 foot-pound injury equivalence threshold.
What kind of testing qualifies as an FAA-accepted means of compliance, or MOC?
Right now, simply calculating the rigid body kinetic energy is one accepted MOC. But the FAA is really pushing the industry, particularly standards bodies like ASTM International, to develop more sophisticated, standardized test methods. Think things like instrumented impact tests using crash dummies or surrogates, pendulum tests, drop tests, methods that actually measure the force transferred during realistic impact scenarios. Once the FAA formally accepts one of these standardized test methods, it becomes an official MOC. The manufacturer then uses data from tests conducted according to that MOC to support their Declaration of Compliance, or DOC, for a specific drone model and configuration.
This DOC, it sounds like a critical piece of paper, and the responsibility falls on the pilot to check it.
Absolutely critical. Before conducting OOP under Category 2 or 3, the remote PIC must verify that the specific make and model of their drone is listed on the FAA's official Declaration of Compliance website. You need to confirm it has a valid DOC referencing an accepted MOC for the category you intend to fly under. And this is crucial, that DOC is only valid for the specific configuration tested. If you make significant modifications to the drone, change the propellers, add a heavier aftermarket camera, bolt on extra gear, you likely invalidate the manufacturer's DOC. You then need to get your own safety case approved via a waiver or revert to the original compliant configuration.
We need to circle back to the laceration risk. You mentioned no exposed rotating parts that could lacerate. Applies to categories 1, 2, and 3. Why is that such a strict requirement across the board for these routine OOP categories?
Laceration injury is a major concern for the FAA, particularly from propeller strikes. They look at the potential for those fast-spinning prop tips to cause deep cuts, especially to sensitive areas like the face or neck. So the standard is, if the drone's exposed moving parts, when assessed at their maximum possible speed during an impact, are deemed capable of causing skin laceration, then that design is prohibited for routine flight over people under categories 1, 2, and 3. This often pushes manufacturers towards using propeller guards, ducted fans, or other designs that shield the spinning blades.
Makes sense. Okay, one last piece here. Operations over moving vehicles. How do these OOP categories apply to flying over cars, trucks, boats?
Flying over moving vehicles involving people who aren't participating in the operation is only allowed if the drone meets the requirements of one of the OOP categories 1, 2, 3, or 4. And even then, there's a key restriction similar to Category 3 OOP. You must either be operating over a closed or restricted access site where the drivers are aware of the drone operation, like a closed movie set or a highway section blocked for construction, or if you're over regular traffic, you must not maintain sustained flight over those moving vehicles.
So again, that transit-only idea applies. You can cross over a road briefly with, say, a Category 2 drone to get to your work area, but you couldn't use that same drone to follow a specific car down the highway or continuously monitor traffic flow over unaware drivers.
Precisely. Sustained flight, hovering, circling, passing vehicles, that's generally prohibited over non-participating traffic unless the site is controlled. And the FAA is pretty comprehensive in defining moving vehicles. Cars, trucks, vans, motorcycles, even boats and trains are included. The goal is to limit the risk exposure for the uninvolved traveling public.
Okay, we've covered the by-rule pathways. Remote ID is the foundation. Night ops are normalized with training and lights, and ops over people are possible via categories 1 through 4, relying on performance standards and DOCs. But what about operations that go beyond these? Really advanced stuff like flying miles away or controlling a whole swarm.
Right. For those truly advanced operations, the standard rules aren't enough. You still need specific permission from the FAA. And that brings us to understanding the different types of permission, the regulatory doors you need to knock on, the WECA's playbook, waivers, authorizations, and exemptions.
Right, WAX.
Yeah.
This sounds important because these terms get thrown around and sometimes used interchangeably, but they mean very different things, don't they?
Yeah.
We need to be clear on which door to use for which kind of request.
Absolutely critical distinction. Let's break down WAX. First, W is for waiver. A waiver is formal permission from the FAA to deviate from one or more specific rules listed within Part 107. And importantly, it's only the rules listed in the regulation itself, specifically Section 107.205, that are actually waivable. To get a waiver, you can't just ask nicely. You have to submit a detailed safety case proving that your proposed operation with your specific mitigations achieves an equivalent level of safety ELOS, you'll hear it called, compared to just following the standard rule.
Okay, so waiver or position to break a specific Part 107 rule if you prove it's still safe. Next, A is for authorization.
Authorization is much simpler, conceptually. It's primarily about getting permission to fly in controlled airspace, specifically Class B, C, D, or the surface areas of Class E airspace, usually found around airports. This is governed by Section 107.41. The key thing to remember, an airspace authorization is not a waiver. You're not breaking a rule, you're simply getting permission to enter a specific type of airspace, usually for a defined time and altitude. Nowadays, most of these authorizations are handled almost instantly through LANC, the Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability System. It's been a massive success, processing millions of automated requests. For areas not covered by LANC, you'd submit a request manually through the FAA's Drone Zone portal.
LANC has definitely been a game changer for quick airspace access near airports. Okay, finally, X is for exemption. How is this different from a waiver?
An exemption provides relief from FAA regulations that exist outside of Part 107. Think of rules that apply more broadly to all aircraft. The most common example for drone operators is seeking an exemption under 49 U.S.C. Section 44807. This is the pathway you generally have to use if your aircraft weighs 55 pounds or more, because Part 107 rules inherently don't apply to aircraft that heavy. You need an exemption from the standard aircraft certification rules to operate that large UAS legally.
Got it. Waiver for Part 107 rules, authorization for airspace, exemption for rules outside 107. Let's focus back on that waiver list, Section 107.205. Now that night ops and basic OP are mostly handled by rule, which Part 107 rules are the big ones people still need waivers for today, the ones requiring that robust safety case.
Yeah, the list of waivable rules in 107.205 is fixed. With night and OOP largely addressed by categories 1 to 4 and light and training rules, the waivers generating the most activity and requiring the most significant safety justifications now came to be. Number 1, unquestionably, is Section 107.31, operating limitations. Visual line of sight aircraft operation. This is the waiver needed for any flight beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS. That's the key enabler for long-distance inspections, large area mapping, and future delivery networks. Another big one is Section 107.35, operation of multiple small unmanned aircraft. This waiver is needed if one remote pilot wants to control more than one drone simultaneously, like operating a swarm for cinematography or a coordinated search pattern. Then there's Section 107.51, activating limitations, altitude and speed. While Part 107 sets the ceiling at 400 feet above ground level, AGL, you might need a waiver to fly higher, often requested for inspecting tall structures like wind turbines or communication towers, where you need to stay within 400 feet of the structure itself but might exceed 400 feet AGL. And Section 107.25, operation from a moving vehicle or aircraft.
While the rule allows operating from a moving vehicle or boat in sparsely populated areas, doing so in other areas or deviating from the specific conditions often requires a waiver, especially if combined with other waived operations.
And we should probably reiterate that point about package delivery. If you want a waiver for BVLOS 107.31, or maybe operating from a moving delivery van 107.25, and the whole point is to carry property for compensation or hire.
Yeah, the FAA has been very clear on this carve-out. Standard Part 107 waivers for 107.31 BVLS and 107.25 moving vehicle ops will not be approved if the primary purpose of the flight is carrying property commercially, i.e. package delivery. Those types of operations require a higher level of safety assurance and typically need to go through a more rigorous process, like obtaining an air carrier certification under Part 135 or potentially using an exemption pathway until specific drone delivery rules like the proposed Part 108, are finalized. You can't just get a simple 107 waiver for drone delivery.
Okay, so let's say a pilot identifies they do need a waiver for something permissible, like BVLS for infrastructure inspection. The next hurdle is convincing the FAA reviewer that it's safe. The source material really hammers home the need to adopt the evaluator mindset and specifically follow the WSAG. What exactly are the waiver safety explanation guidelines, the WSAG?
The WSAG is essentially the FAA's playbook. It's the rubric, the checklist their internal safety analysts use when they evaluate your waiver application. Understanding and structuring your application around the WSAG is absolutely paramount. Why? Because the FAA's own data shows the most common reason for denying a waiver application is simply insufficient information. Often, the denial is just a sentence or two saying you didn't adequately address the risks or provide enough detail. By following the WSA structure, you are proactively answering the questions the FAA evaluator has in the format they expect. It dramatically increases your odds of demonstrating that required equivalent level of safety, ELOS, and getting approved.
Okay, let's dive into that structure. What are the key components, the pillars, that the WSAG requires you to address in your safety case? Let's use that BVLOS example.
Right. The WSAG framework typically asks you to thoroughly address 5 core areas. 1. Concept of operations, CONOPS. This needs to be the detailed story of your proposed flight. Who is involved? What specific aircraft and ground control system are you using? What sensors? What command and control? C2 links. Where exactly will you fly? Maps, coordinates, altitudes. When? Day-night, weather minimums. And how will the operation be conducted step by step? It needs to paint a crystal clear picture for someone who knows nothing about your specific setup. 2, hazard identification and risk assessment. This is where you have to brainstorm everything that could possibly go wrong. Be exhaustive. For BVLOS, think. Loss of the C2 link, loss of GPS signal, unexpected bad weather, battery failure, motor failure, encountering manned aircraft that aren't broadcasting electronically, non-cooperative traffic, software glitches, birds, you name it. For each hazard, you need to assess its initial likelihood, probability, and the severity of the outcome if it happened. Severity. 3, risk mitigation strategies. This is the absolute core of your safety argument. For every single hazard you identified, you must propose specific actions, procedures, or technologies you will use to reduce the probability or severity of that hazard. And this is key. Your mitigations must be concrete, specific, and ideally measurable.
Can you give an example? What's a measurable mitigation versus a vague one for, say, the risk of hitting a manned aircraft during BVLOS?
Sure. A vague, insufficient mitigation would be, pilots will be careful and look for other planes. That tells the FAA nothing. A strong, measurable mitigation would be something like, the operation will utilize a ground-based detect and avoid system consisting of specific radar model and an ADS-B in receiver feeding data to specific software platform. The system has demonstrated a 99.5% probability of detection for typical general aviation targets at a range of 3 nautical miles in specific weather conditions. Automated alerts are provided to the remote PI if any track projects to enter a 2,000-foot horizontal and 500-foot vertical safety buffer around the UAS within 60 seconds. The PIS is required to execute a pre-planned avoidance maneuver described maneuver within 10 seconds of receiving an alert. See the difference. Specific hardware, performance data, clear thresholds, defined actions. After detailing your mitigations, you then need to reassess the residual risk, showing how your proposed mitigations bring the overall risk down to an acceptable level, ideally meeting or exceeding the safety level provided by the original VLOS rule. 4, personnel, training and qualifications. You need to detail who is doing what. What are their specific roles, remote PIC, visual observer, system maintainer? What are the minimum qualifications, training requirements, initial and recurrent, and flight experience needed for each role? If you're using special equipment, like that DAA system, you need to document the specific training received on that system. 5, abnormal and emergency procedures. What happens when things do go wrong despite your mitigations? You need detailed step-by-step checklists or playbooks for handling every foreseeable abnormal situation or emergency identified in your hazard analysis. Lost C2 link, lost GPS, system malfunction, unexpected aircraft encounter, incursion into restricted airspace, weather deterioration. For BVLOS, this often includes predefined contingency routes, emergency landing sites, ditch sites, and procedures for activating a flight coordination system, FTS, if necessary. These procedures need to be documented, trained, and ideally practiced.
Wow. That is an incredibly detailed and rigorous process. Building that WSAA case sounds like a major undertaking. The FAA aims for a 90-day turnaround on waiver decisions. Is that realistic for something as complex as a first-time BVLOS waiver application built to this standard?
That 90-day time frame is the FAA's internal processing goal, and they often meet it for simpler waivers or renewals. But for highly complex, novel operations like initial BVLOS requests, waivers for multiple UAS, or operations involving brand new technologies, it can certainly take longer. The application might need review by multiple FAA departments, flight standards, engineering, spectrum management, air traffic control. It's not unusual for these complex waivers to take 6 months, 9 months, or even longer, sometimes involving back and forth questions and requests for more data from the FAA. The key takeaway for anyone planning advanced operations is budget significant time for this waiver process. Start early and submit the most thorough, detailed, WSAJ-aligned application possible right from the start to minimize delays.
Okay, so we've established the heavy lift required for those complex waivers. Now let's shift gears slightly, moving from the tactics of compliance today to looking ahead the strategic view, the regulatory horizon. Let's start with BVLOS again, but maybe explore some nuances.
Right. BVLOS isn't monolithic. There are different ways it's being approached. One interesting area is how public safety agencies sometimes get access to a limited form of BVLOS, often called tactical BVLOS or TBVLOS.
Tactical BVLOS.
Oh.
How does that work? Is it different from the full 107.31 waiver we just discussed?
It is. Public safety agencies, when operating under a Certificate of Authorization or Waiver, COA, which falls under the rules for public aircraft operations, can often get a special provision included in their COA for BVLOS. This provision typically allows the remote pilot to fly the drone beyond their direct line of sight, but usually with distance limits maybe up to 1,500 feet away from the pilot and altitude limits, often capped at 400 feet AGL or lower. And the key constraint is usually that the drone must remain laterally within a certain distance, say 50 feet, of a large obstruction.
Obstructions like buildings, trees, terrain. What's the safety rationale behind allowing BVLOS when close to obstructions?
The safety argument is based on reducing the probability of conflict with manned aircraft. The idea is that if the drone is flying very low and staying very close to ground clutter, hugging buildings, following tree lines, staying low in valleys, the chance of it encountering a traditional airplane or helicopter, which typically operate at higher altitudes and further away from such obstacles, is significantly minimized. This makes BVLOS incredibly useful for specific public safety missions. Searching dense forests for a missing person, inspecting the roof of a large warehouse during a fire, getting visuals around corners during a barricaded suspect situations, scenarios where maintaining constant VLOS is difficult or dangerous for the crew, but the drone stays relatively contained near ground level.
That makes sense. Now let's contrast that with full, long-range BVLOS needed for, say, inspecting miles of pipeline or power line. That requires the 107.31 waiver and that full WSHU safety case we detailed. A huge part of that safety case is proving robust detect and avoid, or DAA, capability. What does the FAA really look for in a DAA system for waiver approval?
DAA is arguably the critical enabling technology for widespread BVLOS. It's the system that allows the drone to see other air traffic and safely maneuver to avoid collisions without relying solely on the pilot's eyes. The FAA scrutinizes DAA capabilities very closely in BVLOS waiver applications. They generally look for systems that can detect both cooperative and non-cooperative traffic.
Cooperative versus non-cooperative, what's the difference?
Cooperative traffic refers to aircraft that are electronically broadcasting their position. The main technology here is ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. Most commercial airliners and increasingly more general aviation aircraft are equipped with ADS-B out transmitters. A drone equipped with an ADS-B in receiver can hear these broadcasts and know the precise location, altitude, and velocity of nearby cooperative aircraft. That's a huge safety benefit. Non-cooperative traffic refers to aircraft that are not electronically broadcasting their position. This could include some older general aviation planes, agricultural aircraft, gliders, balloons, or potentially military aircraft operating without transponders. Detecting these requires onboard sensors on the drone itself.
What kinds of onboard sensors are used for detecting non-cooperative traffic?
This is where passive DAA systems come in. These rely on sensors like electro-optical, EO, infrared IR cameras, using visual or thermal imaging combined with sophisticated algorithms to detect and track potential airborne objects. Radar. Smaller, lightweight radar systems designed specifically for drones that can detect objects based on radio wave reflections. Acoustic sensors, using microphones and signal processing to detect the sound signatures of nearby aircraft engines or rotors. For a robust BVLOS or waiver, the FAA typically wants to see redundancy. You often need a combination of systems, maybe ADS-B in for cooperative traffic, plus a validated radar or camera-based system for non-cooperative targets. Your waiver application needs to include specific performance data for your chosen DIA suites, things like the probability of detection at different ranges and closing speeds, the system's latency, how quickly it detects and reacts, and the reliability of the avoidance maneuvers it triggers.
Another seemingly non-negotiable piece for many BVLOS waivers is the Flight Termination System, or FTS. That sounds pretty drastic, basically, a way to make the drone fall out of the sky. Why is this required, and what makes a system qualified as a proper FTS?
It is a drastic measure, but it's seen as the ultimate safety net. The FTS is mandatory for many complex operations, especially BVLOS, because if something goes catastrophically wrong, say, the drone completely loses its command link and GPS navigation and starts flying erratically, flyaway, there needs to be a reliable way to bring it down in a controlled manner before it can endanger people on the ground, hit critical infrastructure, or collide with a manned aircraft. To be considered a reliable FTS by the FAA, the system typically needs to meet several stringent criteria. 1, independence. It absolutely must operate independently of the drone's primary flight control system. It needs its own C2 link, often on a different frequency, its own processor, and crucially, its own independent power source battery. If the main flight battery dies or the main radio link fails, the FTS must still be functional and activatable. 2, reliability. The system must have demonstrated very high reliability in activating when commanded. 3. Controlled termination. When activated, it must bring the drone down in a predictable way, usually by deploying a parachute or by immediately cutting motor power and initiating steep controlled descent. The goal is to ensure the drone lands within a pre-analyzed, confined safety area on the ground. 4. Timeliness. Activation and termination must occur within a specific short time frame to prevent the drone from traveling too far outside its intended operating area during a failure.
That emphasis on independence and reliability really highlights why those detailed lost link procedures in the WSAG are so critical. It's not just about the drone trying to return to home anymore, is it?
Not for complex BVLOS, no. The lost link playbook for a BVLOS waiver goes far beyond a simple RTH function. It has to detail a layered sequence of actions. What does the aircraft do immediately upon losing the primary C2 link? For example, attempt to reestablish for X seconds. If the link isn't reestablished, what pre-programmed contingency profile does it fly? For example, climb to a specific safe altitude, fly a specific holding pattern, or proceed along a predetermined lost link route. Where are the pre-surveyed approved emergency landing locations, ditch sites, along the route? How does the aircraft navigate to one if the link loss persists? Under what specific conditions, e.g. deviating too far from the contingency route, flying outside the geofence, prolonged link loss, will the FTS be activated, either manually by the safety pilot or potentially automatically by the system? These aren't suggestions. They are hard requirements that need to be defined, documented, tested, and proven reliable as part of the waiver safety case.
Okay, let's briefly touch base with public safety operations again. We mentioned COAs and TBVLOS. Is it generally recommended for a public safety agency, like a police or fire department, to operate under both Part 107 and a public aircraft COA?
Unquestionably, yes. Holding both provides the most operational flexibility. Part 107 is fantastic for routine day-to-day non-emergency missions. It grants easy access to LA&C for controlled airspace, allows use of standard commercial drones and software, and the rules are well understood. The COA, however, provides access to privileges needed during true emergencies or specific public safety tasks that Part 107 doesn't easily allow by rule. Things like the potential for TBVLOS we discussed, perhaps limited authority to fly over people during an active emergency response when cleared by incident command, or the ability to operate above 400 feet AGL if mission requirements dictate. For example, observing a large wildfire from a higher vantage point. Having both tools in the toolbox is the best practice.
And when these agencies are talking to the FAA, whether for a COA or maybe a special waiver, they need to frame their requests carefully, right? Focusing on airspace safety.
That is absolutely essential advice. The FAA's primary mandate, their core mission, is ensuring the safety and efficiency of the national airspace system. While they understand the importance of public safety missions, their regulatory decisions have to be based on airspace safety. So when an agency submits a request, the language needs to shift from justifying the operational need, we need to fly BVLOS to find the bad guy, to explaining the safety procedures. Here is our detailed protocol for deconflicting with other air traffic using specific technology, our pilot training standards for BVLOS, our loss link procedures, and our geofencing strategy to ensure we remain within the authorized operating area. Speaking the FAA's language, the language of risk assessment, mitigation procedures, and airspace integration is the fastest path to getting approvals.
What about true emergencies? If a fire department needs to fly immediately in restricted airspace, like over an active wildfire with a TFR, temporary flight restriction, in place, or in zero-grid airspace near an airport where LANC isn't available, is there a hotline?
Yes, there's a specific process for that, designed for urgent, life or property critical situations. It's called the Special Governmental Interest, or SGI process. Public safety agencies needing immediate emergency airspace access should contact the FAA's Systems Operations Support Center, the SOSC. The SOSC is staffed 24/7/365 by experienced air traffic services personnel. They have the authority and capability to rapidly coordinate and issue emergency airspace authorizations or amend existing COAs on the spot. They can work directly with air traffic control to clear airspace, modify TFRs for the drone operation, or grant access to otherwise restricted areas. Contacting the SOSC is usually much faster and more effective in a genuine emergency than trying to call the local airport tower directly.
Good to know. One last topic in this section, counter-UAS or CUAS. Drones being used for bad purposes. What's the FAA's role here? Are they the ones shooting down rogue drones?
No, and this is a common misconception. The FAA does not have the authority to actively intercept or disable drones, nor can they grant that authority to state or local agencies or private entities. Federal law is extremely clear and restrictive on this. Currently, only 4 federal agencies, the Department of Justice, including FBI, Department of Homeland Security, including Coast Guard, Secret Service, Department of Defense, and Department of Energy, for protecting nuclear sites, have the legal authority to deploy active CUAS measures, which might include jamming, spoofing, or kinetic means, physically intercepting or disabling the drone.
So if local police or an airport sees a threatening drone, they can't just jam its signal or try to net it.
Legally, no. They can observe, report, and potentially use other methods to track the operator, but active electronic or physical mitigation is reserved for those specific federal agencies under specific circumstances.
If the FAA isn't doing the mitigation, what is their role regarding CUAS?
The FAA's role is primarily coordination and ensuring the safety of the NAS during a CUAS operation conducted by an authorized federal agency. For example, if DHS is planning to use GPS jamming technology to protect a sensitive event, the FAA needs to be involved to understand the potential impact area and ensure that jamming doesn't inadvertently affect legitimate air traffic control, disrupt navigation for nearby manned aircraft, or interfere with critical ground-based navigation systems like maritime shipping. Their focus is on preventing unintended consequences within the broader airspace system caused by the defensive CUAS measures. Okay, that covers the current advanced operations landscape. But now let's look over the horizon. The FAA isn't planning to rely on waivers forever, especially for BVLOS. There's a major shift coming.
Right. We've talked about how complex and time-consuming the current BVLOS waiver process is. It doesn't really scale for widespread use. The FAA has signaled they want to move toward routine, rule-based BVLOS.
Exactly. That intention was made very clear with the publication of the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the BVLOS NPRM, back in August 2025, a just date based on actual publication if known. This is placeholder. This NPRM is a huge deal. It signals the next fundamental evolution in drone integration, arguably on par with the original creation of Part 107 itself.
What's the basic idea behind this proposed new framework? Is it creating a new part, like Part 108?
That seems to be the direction. The NPRM outlines a potential new regulatory part, maybe Part 108, specifically designed for routine BVLOS operations. The whole philosophy is a shift away from today's model of unique, bespoke, case-by-case waiver applications. Instead, the proposed framework relies on establishing standardized requirements. Minimum performance standards for the aircraft, including DAA and C2 link reliability, requirements for pilot training and certification specific to BVLOS, and potentially mandatory participation with certified third-party service providers.
Third-party service providers,
Yeah.
like the USS we mentioned earlier, what role would they play in routine BVLOS under this proposal?
Yes, the concept relies heavily on these Certified Unmanned Aircraft System Service Suppliers, USS. The NPRM suggests they could be responsible for providing critical airspace management functions necessary for safe BVLOS at scale. This might include things like strategic deconfliction, checking proposed flight paths against known manned traffic routes and other drone flights before takeoff, conformance monitoring, actively monitoring drones in flight to ensure they stay within their authorized routes and altitudes, providing real-time weather information, and potentially facilitating communication relays. The idea is to move towards a more predictable, possibly certificate-based or permit-based approval process. An operator would demonstrate their aircraft systems and procedures meet the standards defined in Part 108, potentially get certified, and then operate within defined parameters, possibly using certified USS services, rather than building a completely custom safety case for every single route they want to fly.
This really sounds like the scalable framework the industry, especially logistics and large infrastructure inspection companies, has been advocating for.
It absolutely is. The goal is predictability and scalability. It's about setting clear national standards for DAA performance, for C2 link robustness, for FTS reliability, for pilot competency. Operators who are serious about future BVLOS should be dissecting that NPRM now. It provides a clear roadmap of the FAA's thinking and the likely requirements for technology and procedures in the coming years. If you're developing DAA systems or long-range C2 links today, you need to be aiming to meet or exceed the performance benchmarks being discussed in that proposed rule.
And it follows the pattern we saw with night ops and OOP, doesn't it? Waivers serve as a temporary bridge, gathering data and experience until the FAA feels comfortable enough to codify requirements into standard rules.
Precisely. Waivers are the proving ground. They allow innovation and gather operational data. Once industry standards mature and the FAA builds confidence, the goal is always to transition to a more efficient rule-based system. But even when Part 108 becomes reality, the underlying discipline learned from crafting those rigorous WSEG-style safety cases, The detailed ConOps, the thorough hazard analysis, the measurable mitigations, the focus on residual risk that discipline will remain invaluable. It's the foundation for safe operations, for passing audits, and for building a strong internal safety culture, regardless of which specific regulatory part you're flying under. Building that internal safety case factory mindset is key for any professional operation.
That feels like a perfect place to wrap up our main discussion. This has been a really deep dive. We covered the absolute necessity of remote ID, the digital license plate, and the fact that enforcement is fully active now, since March 16, 2024. We walked through the big shift away from waivers towards performance-based categories for night operations and, importantly, operations over people, really digging into those MOC-DOC requirements and kinetic energy caps. We clarified the crucial difference between a waiver, an authorization, think LANC, and an exemption, think heavy drones. And then we explored the really complex safety cases needed today for advanced ops like BVLOS and how public safety navigates these rules, while also looking ahead to the FAA's plan to normalize BVLOS, likely through a future Part 108. The big takeaway seems clear. The entire framework is now firmly rooted in performance-based standards.
It really is. And what that means for you, the operator, is that compliance is no longer a passive check-the-box activity. It's an active, ongoing process. It requires constant validation. Are you checking the FAA's DOC list before flying over people? Are you verifying your RID system is functional on every pre-flight? Is your pilot currency for night ops up to date? Maybe most importantly, are you conducting thorough site-specific risk assessments using that WSEG thinking for any flight that pushes beyond simple routine operations? If you're aiming to be a professional advanced operator, you absolutely have to build and maintain that robust internal safety management system, that safety case factory, with clear procedures, checklists, and documented evidence showing you consistently meet or exceed that equivalent level of safety the FAA demands.
So we leave you with this final thought. Part 107 explicitly requires drone pilots to always yield the right-of-way to manned aircraft. Now, consider the data. Research suggests that even an alert pilot in a manned aircraft typically needs about 12.5 seconds from initially sighting a potential collision hazard to taking evasive action. And drones, being relatively small and often quiet, might only be visually acquired or even heard after they've already entered that critical reaction window in a high-speed encounter. Given this reality, as we move towards more routine beyond visual line-of-sight operations under proposed rules like Part 108, how will you ensure your operational procedures and your detect and avoid technology incorporate redundancies that act significantly faster than human biological limits? How do you guarantee safety when VLS is gone and reaction times are measured in seconds? Go explore that challenge, the intersection of technological procedure and human factors in the increasingly integrated airspace.
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above. Go beyond. Get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.